My name is Jordan Herbs,
And I am Michael Ruiz.
and today we're going to explore how we see Bitcoin's role in shaping the way an individual views life and makes decisions. Because I'm starting to see how dramatic an effect that those decisions made can be. So I want to start talking about an analogy I've been working on called the war, which most people have no idea about until they become Bitcoiners. So, what is the war? It's fiat currency. It's the whole fiat paradigm. It's the money, the mindsets, and the baseline theft inherent to the system. But most people have no idea because this war is in our minds. It's about our ignorance, keeping us ignorant. It's about not educating us in school about how money works. And it's essentially everything we as Bitcoiners know is the problem with the fiat paradigm. So it's Bitcoin that wakes us up from it, learning about it. But it doesn't stop there once you learn what's going on. It continues to shape your mentality, your mindsets, once again, how we make decisions. And it's pretty impactful. So we're going to explore that today. This potential World War III has been happening, since the 70s? Since we got off the gold standard, potentially? And it's all been taking place in our consciousness.
Yeah. It's an interesting thought, and I think it is the case for a lot of people. However, I could see how me personally, aware of this war because of Bitcoin, but I could definitely see how now that Bitcoin exists, and it exists almost in an immovable way, right? An unshakable way, an immutable way, right? That because it acts as the standard for money now, it's so easy and obvious to see, just how big a scam the current fiat paradigm is, right? Once you look at Bitcoin, examine it, look at it objectively, and then compare it to the fiat system, you realize the inherent theft that's built into the system almost by design, right? And you recognize that the system was created in order to siphon off wealth from the masses and concentrate it in the hands of a few. Now, whether those few people who designed the system says it's for the greater good, right? Like we had good intentions, and we feel like as central planners we were able to maintain society and the bedrock in which civilization is built on better. We could manage it, right? And it just got corrupt somewhere along the line, or whether it was intentionally designed that way, right? To be corrupt from the beginning. It doesn't matter. It's like we see the downstream effects now. And so, I think that once you wake up to that difference in, the world that could be with sound money and the world that is with fiat currency, and you start exploring that, your mind like literally shifts. The way you think, the way you operate, the beliefs you had, your values, everything starts to slowly shift over time. And that's an interesting transformation process.
I know for me and many of my peers in college, for example, we were so over the system, and how corrupt it was. And it was right in the wake of the bailouts in 2008, 2009. And
did you participate in Occupy Wall Street and stuff like that?
No, because I was living in Thailand. But I was watching it from afar, super stoked.
Occupy Thailand.
Yeah, I was living in Bangkok, living a very different life. But I just remember all my peers in that era, we were all equally outraged, but we didn't have our finger on the source of it. We didn't understand. And because we were so frustrated and angry at what we saw, the inequality in the world, the wars, everything, but we didn't understand why. And then obviously I never could see any kind of solution. I just wanted nothing to do with money. I thought it was the idea of money, that we use it to transact. I'd never read anything really Austrian economics. I'd never read Creature from Jekyll Island. I just saw all the issues. I studied history. I was looking at everything like, man, things are fucked. But I never got the piece to the puzzle that is fiat currency, right? And so it wasn't until I got deeper into Bitcoin, which took another 4 years after first learning about Bitcoin.
The thing about fiat currency is it's a loaded term in a way, right? Like I know what you're referring to when you say fiat currency, but what's the inherent problem with fiat currency, right? Is it that it's paper money? Is it that, it is controlled by a few people? What's the issue with fiat currency in your eyes?
Well, it starts with the fact that it's not backed by anything.
Uh-huh.
It's just by decree. That's what fiat means, by decree of the state, the government, that once you realize you don't trust that government or that state, then you're like, okay, well then what is this thing that we are basically coerced into using for our transactions of our life force energy? Mm-hmm. And that's a kind of a spiritual thing. It's kind of a big deal when you realize that, okay, so there's that, it's not backed, then it's centrally planned, centrally controlled by undemocratically elected officials, just people put into place there. And once again, it goes back to the ignorance factor. No one understands why things work. So no one even thinks twice about how people at the Federal Reserve are just put there. Mm-hmm. No one's voting them in. And obviously, maybe there was a chance to get off of the fiat standard. I don't know. Well, has there been a chance since the 70s with a single president? I don't think so. Maybe with JFK or something before the 70s.
I think once you get on a fiat standard and you make money by decree, it's hard to get back on to any type of, tethered currency or form of money, like if it was backed by gold, because there's a whole bunch of people that are going to have to pay the inflationary tax that occurred, right? A lot of people, if you put the dollar back on the gold standard, there's going to be a lot of people left without gold.
Saifedean talks about it in the Bitcoin Standard. Politicians used to have to run on how they were going to allocate the budget. Like, okay, this is what we're going to do with this money. This is what we're going to do with this money, because that money was tax money and people wanted to know. Okay, then because of fiat money, who talks about budgets anymore?
Yeah,
no one has to care about budgets because they just print the money they need to give money to Ukraine or to whatever it is. Like,
going towards your point that, this is a war on our consciousness. It's a war to keep us ignorant, especially about one of the fundamental underpinnings of a civilization, our money, right? And this is a quote by Henry Ford. It is well enough that people of the nation do not understand our banking and monetary system. For if they did, I believe there would be a revolution before tomorrow morning.
Yeah.
Right? It's like if everyone understood how badly they were being scammed, like literally, when you think about it, for instance, let's say you go to work and you're making a couple $100 a day, right? You're a waiter or a bartender or whatever it is, and you're exchanging 8 hours of your time plus your labor for $200. And here the Fed comes in and they literally print maybe 30,000 lifetimes of that, right? Of your work in a matter of a millisecond, right? Now with money being digital, it's like, what's the point of working? Like, what are you worth? If the Fed can just print out X amount of dollars that represents so many years of your life force in a matter of milliseconds.
It's like what Elizabeth said at the halving party in our video. If someone's stealing your life force indirectly, they're stealing your life.
Yeah.
I may as well be like killing you slowly.
Yeah.
And it just brings up these questions. It's like, well, why work? Why pay taxes if they can just make the money? It brings up all these questions once you start seeing how it really works.
This whole thing is absurd. Like the more you think about it, we live in clown world for real.
Yeah, well,
like the fact that this is actually the basis for how human civilization functions. It's amazing to me that we've gotten this far. Right?
Yeah. Well, who knows how much longer is left? We don't know. But Bitcoin is both the ultimate defense and the ultimate offense in this war, and not simply for financial reasons, because Bitcoin transforms your mindset and essentially can free you and your entire reality from this war that you never chose to be a part of, from this world you kind of were born into. Like everything works this way.
Yeah. Well, when you think of like money as a vessel for your life force, that is, if you go out there and you work for 10 hours, so you give your time, you give your energy, right, and your ingenuity, your human capital, and you use that for productive means to the to the betterment of society, the betterment of humanity, right? And money is a representation of that value which you've contributed. So like back in the day, or maybe I'm romanticizing this a little bit, but like the basic idea is that, if we have sound money, the richer you are, it literally means the more you've done for society,
The more value you've contributed.
and created. Yeah. But in a fiat system, that all gets corrupted. It's like the more money you have, the closer you are to this printing press, that they literally just, create this money out of thin air, literally robbing the value out of, millions of people and siphoning it into, the concentrated hands of a few. And it's literally the most wealthy are the most corrupt in a fiat system.
Well, and then further downstream, it affects the culture. And this is why it's a status symbol to own a Ferrari or to live large. Like, that's all because of the fiat paradigm. Like, these are things that don't matter. Like, they're like monkey matters, like gold shiny objects. Let's use it to get laid, so we can procreate, and then that's how our society runs. It wasn't always this way.
Yeah, it's like satisfies our base level, like monkey mind, It's like the fiat currency literally uplifts, these desires that come from our like animalistic drive, very materialistic, very impulsive and so forth. And so, yeah, like you could see literally the characteristics of society, and you could trace it back to the form of money they use.
And you could even argue that in the past, like rulers, even like the clergy, the Catholic Church, all these people that in various instances of history, you'd have examples of why these were bad people for one reason or another. But these people in power that had all this wealth on a non-fiat current status standard. In a non-fiat world, these princes, these kings, these popes, whatever, had all this wealth. But you could still argue that they were contributing value to society. If everyone's Christian and they're playing a role as the Catholic Church, okay, great, right? Then people could agree, okay, this is valuable. They deserve that wealth. This king is ruling this whole place and keeping us safe, right, with the military or whatever it is. Now, that's not always the case, but I'm just trying to make a simple point here that you could argue that at least that wealth is deserved. And then even going into the early 1900s, you have all these new tycoons of oil, steel, all this stuff, people making a ton of money. But look what was happening in society. People are driving cars now. There's roads. There's manufacturing plants making steel and stuff so we can make bigger buildings, like skyscrapers, which were like monumental feats of humanity. So there's plenty of arguments of why, maybe this stuff wasn't a good contribution, but at least you can actually see like, wow, well, these guys were wealthy kind of for a reason. Mm-hmm. And society was shifting thanks to them. Like Thomas Edison and electricity.
Yeah.
Like, so all this stuff. And back then, like, what's his name? Griffith? J.W. Griffith, I think. But the guy, he started Griffith Park in Los Angeles. He was a billionaire in like 20s or 30s. He donated this huge swath of land, beautiful land in LA, like right outside of Hollywood. And still today, they can't build anything on it. They can't. It's just a beautiful park where you can walk trails. There's an observatory there. He wanted to contribute to his legacy.
Yeah, I'm thinking about philanthropy. And, philanthropy in a fiat system, I'm just thinking about it right now. And I'm like, it's hard to do in a fiat system because as a philanthropist, you want, you still want to maintain your capital. You still want to maintain your status, right? And so, when you have fiat currency though, and do something good, as I can do that, but I'm more likely to do that, I think, in a sound money system, because the trade-off is me putting my money into something like a park or me putting my money into the stock market because I need to in order to stay afloat, to maintain my status, to maintain my wealth, to maintain whatever I've built over life. Do you get what I'm saying?
Totally.
Yeah, so it reroutes the money from philanthropy to the banks, to the stock market, and so forth.
To maintain that semblance of wealth.
To maintain that semblance of wealth, right? But imagine you had a money that appreciates over time, and so you could like predictably give your philanthropy without having to worry about the trade-off of losing all the capital that you've built over the course of your life.
Yeah, I think it just boils down simply to the value shift, where it's like philanthropy was still cool for billionaires and stuff back then. Now it's pseudo philanthropy. Start charities so you can wash money and move it around to the big guys.
Start charity so you could vaccinate people, you know?
Yeah, so it's like when you see the stark contrast in the values from 100 years ago by the wealthy to now. It's all about power and influence. Even back then, I don't know, I'm not in the mind of these guys, but you can see with their actions what they did, what they donated, like Rockefeller too. You know, like these guys that get a bad rep for whatever reasons, but they like you can't argue with the facts. Like, hey, they did these things trying to make society.
So what was number 2 again?
Well, so okay, so number 1 is becoming aware of it. It's the last phase of ignorance, and the last thing is it's Bitcoin. You're looking at it still from a fiat perspective. It's like, wow, this is a good medium of exchange. I can use it. It's quicker than banks. It's all that, and that's how I started first using it. It was like I was traveling in Asia. I could find local Bitcoiners and trade, and so I wouldn't have to go to the ATM and pay a bunch of money for the exchange rate, for the fees, and all that. So you start thinking about Bitcoin, but still not like a revolution in it. So once you are introduced to it, that's the last phase of ignorance, and then you wake up to the war. That's when you start to, and at least for me, right? I didn't understand money before Bitcoin. So it's thanks to Bitcoin that I learned about money. So in this sequence here, then you wake up to the war, you say, like, oh, wow, this is actually happening. This is going on. And it's a deep rabbit hole.
Yeah, well, I remember when I woke up to the war, it was like I often say, a visceral reaction, a physical reaction. I was really upset, really emotionally distraught because I literally realized how big a scam it was. And I thought about my mom was collecting Social Security. She's gonna like on fixed income. And so I knew that over time, that money would be worth less and less and less and less and less, you know? And I was like, man, they're literally robbing from the grandmas out there, from the elderly.
Like, they don't give a fuck.
Yeah, people on fixed income are the ones that are going to be screwed the most under a fiat system, right? The poor are the ones that are screwed the most because they don't receive any of the benefits of inflation. They receive all the negative consequences from inflation. And so just realizing the inherent evilness in the system, like the inherent injustice, and it made me so upset. I remember recognizing that.
Once again, it hits you at a deep spiritual level because it's immoral.
Yeah.
And you're like, I can't participate in this, like with a clear conscience. Like, I can't. Even if I try to ignore it, like it only lasts for so long.
Well, yeah, I mean, you can't because everything is then a product of the fiat system, everything around you, because it's the money that everyone uses. And while you're using it and you're participating in this economy, you're like, man, like it's literally realizing that you're utilizing a force that is inherently working against you.
It's evil.
Yeah.
It's just evil. And like you're realizing that everything you do is tied to it.
Yeah.
Everything you do, like your whole life. It's freaking, in a way, it's like science fiction genius, right? It's like get a whole species almost.
And
to be
think about
using this
it. If
evil
you're
force.
central planners, right, and you have control of the money supply, and you can use that then to control the congressman, right, with, by funding certain things. So, right, you print money in order to fund programs which line the pockets of the politicians to get the politicians to then further like create laws and programs that can funnel the money further into the economy. So just de facto, the central bank starts becoming the main controller of the economy and American society, de facto the world.
And the education system, the media networks. And so they keep everyone ignorant. This is the war, keeping everyone ignorant of the fact that your life force is being drained day after day in one way or another. And just because we think of slavery as you're in chains, you're in irons, you can't move, you're owned by someone. But modern day slavery is just fiat currency because your life force is being stolen away to the point where it's really hard to get out of it.
Well, what I'm saying too, there's this like cartoon and it's like the Federal Reserve, and it's the Federal Reserve's tentacles wrapping around Congress, wrapping around like regional banks, wrapping around like different institutions, right? And that's the other thing I was trying to say is that over time, like these tentacles of the central bank, the central planners, the money exchangers, they literally start wrapping around all types of different parts of American society, and then de facto get to influence those institutions and those, you know, staples of society. And we get to see the value system of the central planners, of the central bankers, like literally through the money and the results that come from it. And so if you look at the American education system, if you look at our food system, if you look at everything, you see that this is all designed in a way that extracts from the American people and concentrates into the hands of a few. And I'm not just talking about money now, I'm just talking about in general, right? It keeps the system itself has created a culture that keeps individuals down and suppressed.
Dude, it's science fiction genius. It's evil, but it's science fiction genius. So this leads into the third step, which as you're waking up to it, you start investing a little in Bitcoin, even just like other cryptos. And then you start to get financial gains. And you're like, wait a minute, there's actually incentive for me to start fighting this war now. Because you start to learn, wait a minute, I can just opt out by putting all my money in Bitcoin, rerouting my monetary energy. And so that's when step 3, start fighting back, so to speak, fighting, where you're saving in Bitcoin. And maybe later we start spending in Bitcoin, which we'll get to when we move to El Salvador.
Totally rerouting the demand for dollars, right? So one of the things that keeps the dollar afloat and the value of the dollar afloat is the demand for dollars in order to transact. It's also one of the reasons why I think Bitcoin being a medium of exchange is so important, because
it creates demand.
It creates demand, and the medium of exchange buyer of Bitcoin buys Bitcoin regardless of the price, because he's just using it as a vessel, as a medium of exchange, as a value transfer. And so that creates some baseline demand that keeps the value of the currency afloat. And we could take that and apply it to the dollar as well, right? So this is why I also think for Bitcoiners, you know, there's this idea of hodl, never spend your Bitcoin, this and that. But by default, you're then still supporting the fiat system, right? Because you're creating demand for the dollars in order to transact economically. And so if you want to remove that support, it's like you got to remove that demand. And in order to remove that demand, you have to like start transacting in different currencies. And Bitcoin is just an easy, logical step.
That was deep. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
No, exactly. And so you start to realize that there's more than just, it's more than just a medium of exchange and valuing with it. It's something that goes back into the spiritual purpose. It's like, okay, well, now me and others can opt out of this immoral system and start doing things more for ourselves in a way. It's like the more we use it, the more we're empowering each other as individuals, as communities. And like, we're not like, think about how individualized and atomized people are in our Western culture. Everyone's all about me, me, me. And we've fallen away from community, tribal, like work together, do things together. And I love living in El Salvador because I feel like there's more of that spirit of doing things together. And it kind of starts with, we all pay each other in Bitcoin.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'm really surprised and impressed and hopeful about how fast this circular economy is being built out here, right? I think especially if more people come down and start building businesses and start like really emphasizing that they just want to build on Bitcoin and use Bitcoin, this is gonna spread so fast. This is like a meme, bro. Bitcoin becomes viral like a meme at some point over here in El Salvador, and it literally just transforms one day. Like what would seem like in a blink of an eye, right? It's going to be like one day, you know, people are laughing at you if you're asking to pay in Bitcoin. And the next day people are like literally demanding Bitcoin as the only payment.
This is really interesting. I hadn't thought about this yet, but obviously for that to happen, also the Bitcoiners moving here need to be onboarding more local vendors into Bitcoin and encouraging them and teaching them.
Look at what we're doing over here.
Well, but hang on. I just want to make this point. It's really interesting to me because on my last thread about El Salvador, someone left a late comment. I got into a discussion with them saying how, but because of all the people moving here, all the expats, it's getting so expensive, and minimum wage is still $15 a day. Blah blah blah. And so first I said, well, it's mostly Salvadorians moving back with U.S. money, but she's like, they're expats too. They left. I was like, okay, fine, make that argument. And so I start to think, like, what? So what? It's expensive to live here. We were talking about it with Veronica today, our helper in the house, and she's like, it's really expensive here. And I was like, for how long has it been expensive? A few years? She's like, no, since we got off the colon, since we went on the dollar, it's been expensive. 25 years. How many years has it been? A long time. Like, it's always been expensive here. And that's because they're on the dollars, because nothing is, like, very little is manufactured locally or cultivated locally. So everything's imported. There's import taxes. There's all this stuff. But anyway, so back to this discussion with this person on Twitter, and she's saying it's basically trying to blame all this money coming in for real estate going up and all that. And so I was thinking, what is the solution here? Does minimum wage go up? Because that is not a long-term solution, because everything's just going to keep getting more expensive as they keep inflating the dollar, right? It's all based on the dollar. So maybe Bitcoin really is the solution here. If everyone just started saving a tiny bit in Bitcoin or getting paid in Bitcoin, then maybe that's how, especially if we're on the eve of a bull run, maybe that's how local Salvadorians start pulling themselves out into a new. And I think this is kind of what Mike Peterson says about Bitcoin Beach. This is when you build a Bitcoin circular economy, you do start to see these effects. Especially as enough years pass.
Especially if Bitcoin rises. But just think about this, right? Think about the El Salvadoran people that we've onboarded into Bitcoin. And, it's scratching the surface. Like, I feel like we're still in the early phases of all of this. But imagine we onboarded, like, between all of us, all the people we onboard, all the people that we get familiarized with Bitcoin, all of that stuff, right? And then imagine, and it's just like 3 of us, 4 of us over here. Now imagine that times 10,
it's exponential.
100, 1,000, so again, I think it's only a matter of time. And I think that, as Bitcoin continues to rise and continues to find stability, it's going to make that even more clear. And over here, they're so far ahead in terms of their citizens being able to buy Bitcoin and use Bitcoin and transact with Bitcoin and save in Bitcoin and create retirement funds in Bitcoin and so forth, right? Like, all the infrastructure is being built out right now over here in El Salvador. The regulatory infrastructure, the technological infrastructure, and so forth.
With the social layers missing.
The social layers being
at
built
a bigger
out too.
scale. At a bigger scale, it's missing.
Yeah, I would say the circular economy is localized to certain regions right now, but like eventually it's going to find its way everywhere. Like, our vendors, they're more inclined to accept Bitcoin now, especially if we find other vendors that do.
Yeah.
Right? They're going to be like, hey, we're going to be like, hey, listen, we want to work with you, but this vendor accepts Bitcoin, and this is where our values lie. This is where our principles lie. And we want to, be a part of this economy, right? Operate on this protocol, the protocol that enables freedom, sovereignty, autonomy, right? We don't want to operate on a protocol that literally robs the life force from people. And so if you want to, work with us, come join this protocol. Come join the Bitcoin cult. We're waiting for you.
Right. Well, it's like, so in this analogy of the war, when we onboard people, we're bringing them into we're bringing them into the ranks. We're bringing them in the first step, which is the last phase of ignorance. So they're aware of Bitcoin. Maybe they use it as a medium of exchange, but that's it. And then the next step is the people that start building businesses around Bitcoin, which locals have. And that is like waking up to the fight. But then you also look at what My First Bitcoin is doing and educating kids about it, right? They're going to be growing up, coming of age, already understanding the war, already realizing that it's being played out, and already seeing what the right choice is. Start using Bitcoin. And they're telling their parents about it, and they're onboarding their families. So then, like, if we look at this as like a generational movement, imagine what's happening here in 20 years if it stays on this path.
Dude,
right?
that's what I'm trying to say. Like, just in the year that I've been here, or whatever it has been coming over here. What month are we in? October?
So like 10 months.
10 months. Like, I'm super stoked for what's about to happen over here. I think also media is going to play a huge role in that. I think also, there's something about El Salvador, right? It's coming out from its own dark ages. And so everybody's kind of like working together to make this a shining example for the rest of the world to follow. So there's this atmosphere of cooperation and hope and optimism, and then you pair that with Bitcoin and all the hope and optimism that comes from being a Bitcoiner. And yeah, I just can see ideas, especially good ideas, really catching on here because of that cooperative, collaborative spirit and that drive to want to make it El Salvador an example for the rest of the world. So, what can happen in 20 years? A lot. What can happen in 5 years? I think we might even be surprised what can happen in 5 years.
And that's interesting to look at a macro scale, because if we go back to the analogy, like step 3, start fighting back by rerouting your monetary energy, there's also side effects for the individual, which I think they also exist on the societal level, which you just named. But proof of work, you start to understand, like, deep down, there's no such thing as a free lunch. And what our generation kind of was programmed and conditioned to think through its non-free market socialist policies, we start to see, oh, wait a minute, that's all because of the fiat base layer.
Well, I tell you, the one way that Bitcoin changes you or transforms you, and this is what you're talking about, the transformation of the individual, right, is by extending, your time horizon as far as
That's the next one.
What you plan for and what you envision. It's literally shifting your time preference from, high time preference, give me now, instant gratification, instant satisfaction to, low time preference, where it's like, let me save for the future, let me think big, let me plan out ideas, and this is how we get a much more Lindy society.
Would you put proof of work and low time preference in the same bucket? Because I separate them because I think there's something really important for our personal integrity and feelings of alignment with the universe in proving the work, not just to others, but to ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're related. 100% they're related, right? But I think earning, your keep in life is
It's how our ancestors had to do it forever to stay alive.
It's integrated into us as human beings. I think that we have fundamental drive to be productive, and I believe that's been given to us by God. And when we're not productive, when we're not a contributing member to society, it literally eats at our soul. And I think it manifests itself in various ways, right? It might not be as obvious, but you might find it happening through addiction, alcoholism, drugs, escapism, stuff like that, right? Where you have to literally cover up the fact that you're not satisfying this fundamental aspect of your humanity, right? And so Bitcoin now gives you a reason to be productive because you get to keep the fruits of your labor, right?
Yeah, right.
There's no incentive to be productive in a fiat system. Again, that's what we were talking about. The waitress that makes $200 a day, that literally the Federal Reserve can print 30,000 lifetimes worth of her labor in a matter of milliseconds, right? What's the incentive to be productive? You're like, what's the point of this if they can just print my value out of thin air? But with Bitcoin, you can't, right? And so if you exchange your labor for Bitcoin as a vessel, as a mechanism, as a store of value, it's like, then that your labor has been captured and it can be transferred later on. And so you're more incentivized to actually work because now you can collect these, little vessels of labor and then use them later on when you need them.
I think it's interesting to talk about the natural inherent drive to work hard, because if you look at, look at feudalism, right? Like Middle Ages feudalism or something, where you're working hard and you just get your own, you're basically growing your own food and giving the rest to your lord. And in exchange, you would get protection, I guess, and feel good and sleep well because you worked all day, right? And I always remember learning, was it in college? I don't know, just in whatever brainwashing camp I was in, how that was kind of like a ploy, like by the Catholic Church, like, oh, you need to work hard, give yourself to, to the hard work, for God, because it kept the peons, it kept the plebs like busy and not thinking about like, well, why do they get all the jewels and the nice food and all that? Why are we working for them, right? Like keep them busy, keep them busy. But it's interesting because it's true. We're wired to work hard. We sleep better. We feel better. We're happier, right?
Content. We're fulfilled.
Yeah, like it's really important, and it is.
And it's not necessarily even hard work, although it's part of it. I think it's meaningful work that you find personally meaningful. And that for everyone that's different, right?
Sure, but I still think if you're working to grow your food to survive, it feels really good.
Oh yeah, because that you can attach meaning to right away.
Yeah, there's like no questions asked.
But if someone else can grow, my food, and I trust them and I have a personal relationship with them, right? I am happy to outsource that. And, the whole division of labor thing is there for a reason, so that I can go with, explore my different interests that I have that I think, I would flourish more, and my productivity would be more substantial if I explored this interest versus like growing my own food.
Sure, it's a Maslow's hierarchy of need thing, right? It's like you're able to like go up the chain because those other things you still find meaning and purpose in.
But I think there's some people that literally have like an interest and a passion for growing food, and like I'm super happy to pay them for that. You know what I mean? Because I don't have that. So like I'm really glad that they do have that passion and that interest, and they're willing to spend hours there, and I'm willing to pay them for that so I can go explore my interest, my passion.
But that's also at like a bigger scale, like an agricultural scale of growing food for lots of people. When I was living in Hawaii, I worked out in the garden an hour and a half, 2 hours every day. And if I was there longer, like we would have all the food we would need. It doesn't take a lot.
Yeah. Well, I mean, personally, I got a new place and we're putting plants and I'm like potting them and stuff like that. And
it's nice. It's fun.
It's super fun. Super
You don't have to do it all day.
I know, but what I'm trying to say is that I can immediately see the value of that and the fulfillment it gives me. I just don't have the interest to be doing it 10 hours a day and growing my food, right?
But what I'm saying though is traditionally, like you don't need to be spending 10 hours a day growing your own food for your family. Mm-hmm. It's a few hours here, a few hours there. Like there's different tasks and chores throughout, but there's still a lot of free time.
I mean, it depends on what you're eating.
It depends on what you're growing and your climate. It depends on a lot of things.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to be herding my cattle. I'd prefer someone else to herd my cattle.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. But if you're just growing things, it's like if you do it right, a lot of it just takes care of itself. Yeah, you could do it for a
hobby. And you could have yourself bell peppers and cucumbers. Like, I know this one guy in Florida, dude, and he lived in a little retirement home, and literally his whole home, right, was surrounded by all types of herbs and all types of fruit trees, and like he made his own little oasis in like his cookie cutter home.
Yeah, and once it's started, it goes on. Like the light, it's really hard for it to die once it's healthy. But also imagine you're going hunting. You go out hunting for a day, you catch a deer. How many pounds of meat are in a deer? How many weeks or months will that feed you for, right? Just by one day of work to go out hunting. Mm-hmm. So I think like when we look at mass agriculture and growing food for a lot of people, yes, it's a full-time job. But if you're just doing it for yourself, it really can be a pretty chill way to live. And you still have plenty of time to follow your heart's desire.
Yeah, it can be a very satisfying and fulfilling like experience. Like going out hunting and then skinning the deer or, butchering whatever animal it is and then bringing back the harvest. I mean, I'm sure you feel like a man. Feel like you want to grunt after that. So yeah, I mean, I could definitely see it, and maybe you're right. It doesn't take a lot to feed you, but like again, I'm still very happy to have the whole division of labor thing and allow people to follow their passions.
Yeah, it's a whole lifestyle shift. Yeah. It's really not just for everyone at all times of the day. And then the last thing I have is like the byproducts, the side effects of rerouting your monetary energy is the life-changing gains. And this like gives you an incentive to fight this war because you're realizing like, wow, not only do I reroute my monetary energy, I feel better from a moral perspective, but actually every 4 years, my wealth is going up quite a bit. And look what it enables me to do. Look at the freedom it's offering. So it's like you get tapped into this vortex, this wave, and you're like, with enough bull run cycles, you could be completely free of the whole thing. And that leads to number 4, which is hodl your ground. So when I thought I was getting free, I built my homestead in Hawaii. I was like, this is it. Cool. We're done. Like, I don't have to play the game anymore. We're going to grow all our own food. We're just going to live off the land. And what I didn't factor into account was geographical sovereignty. I was in a place where they were the most authoritarian of all the states during COVID. And like, you have to show all your paperwork to go in and out of the island. I'm like, wait a minute. I don't want my kids to grow up here. I want my kids to be able to travel and be free and see things in the world. So holding your ground means find a place to plant your flag with integrity, so you can live your values and be around the community that holds those same values as well. And that leads us to why we moved to El Salvador. When all is stripped away, like, sure, there's a lot of opportunity here, but we want to be here because of the other people that think and see the world like us.
Yeah, and the fact that we can live out our values. I think the fact that El Salvador has accepted Bitcoin as legal tender or adopted Bitcoin as legal and tender. If you're really a Bitcoiner, I think this is where you have to be, because there's no other country that has done this yet. And so if we want other countries to do this, then we need to make El Salvador an example. This needs to be a success story. And so if you're a Bitcoiner and you want to put your efforts, your time, your energy, your actions into something meaningful, potentially something world-changing, come to El Salvador and start building, start interacting with the circular economy. This is ground zero for the renaissance that Bitcoin can bring about. If it's going to happen anywhere, it's going to happen here. And so, yeah, I feel like a lot of times people are just spinning their wheels in other countries, where over here you can literally make leaps and bounds of progress just because of the regulatory environment.
I know a lot of people here, though, would bounce back at you saying, like, there's plenty of little Bitcoin circular economies sprouting up around the world in jurisdictions where it's not a country that, like, with legal Bitcoin or whatever, but the whole village is using Bitcoin, and in Brazil or in South Africa.
I just feel like this has the momentum. Okay, so I'll give you an example. We need more tools, better tools to build out the Bitcoin circular economy, right? We need privacy tools. We need payment systems. We need subscription systems, all of this stuff. And the more autonomous it could be in terms of, like, the less third-party involvement necessary, the better, right? But that takes programming, that takes coding. And that takes a regulatory environment that's friendly to that. Now, I don't know if El Salvador is friendly to that degree, right? But if it is, then this is the place to give it a shot. And so we can build out the tools. We can make the advancements that are necessary in order for this then to take place in other parts of the world, right? Like, I see this as the central hub for Bitcoiners eventually.
For those of them able to come here, some people have sick parents, or they have literally, like, ties that they can't break.
Look, man, now. It depends on how big you see this war happening, right?
Yeah,
and
right.
What the consequences are. I mean, people left home all the time and left their parents behind all the time, left their families behind. People, like, literally crossed the Atlantic Ocean to come to America.
Sacrifices.
So yeah, I mean, look, we made sacrifices. You came here with your kids. You didn't have to do that. You could have lived maybe a cushy life in California. I could have lived my cushy life in Miami, right? I could have continued living within the fiat paradigm. So we can make all the excuses we want, right? It really depends on how serious you are about this, right? How serious you are about living out your values, how serious you are about building a world that transcends the fiat system.
I feel like sacrifices are in the name of low time preference as well.
Yeah.
I think it loops back to that. It's like, it just has to be like, is my family here or not? Does it lack comforts of home? Does the culture do things differently? Like, how do I feel? It doesn't matter. Yeah. They're just sacrifices that need to be done. And, if all
that's
of your
the whole thing. Strong men create good times, and it doesn't come without sacrifice. You got to do what you got to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, so you got to put yourself in a compatible jurisdiction. Anyway, my point earlier was just to say that like what Bitcoin can empower microeconomies, Bitcoin can empower communities. And theoretically, you're still fighting the war if you're just with your local community and you have a lot of stature there and you get your whole neighborhood using Bitcoin, all your corner stores, this and that. Like, you're still doing it. You don't have to come to El Salvador.
Yeah, I mean, you're having, the problem is they're not going to accept Bitcoin, right? Like,
Well, they might be though. I'm saying there are some examples that of people that are doing it.
I'm trying to tell you, fine, maybe, but in a very small, non-impactful level, right? Like in the United States, Bitcoin is just going to be used for a store of value. You're not going to get your stores to accept it. You're not going to get people to transact in it. And it's because it's a taxable event every time. And especially if you have a brick and mortar store or stuff like that, they can literally come and confiscate your merchandise and shut down your business and all of that stuff. So it's way too risky in the United States for any of these developments to happen.
But look, that's a question of the government, the regime in charge, right?
Yeah,
This regime here could also change.
I understand, but we have a window of opportunity.
Well, my point is like what John from My First Bitcoin says is his line. He's like, if we have to rely on a certain politician to win, then we've already lost because Bitcoin enables us to get into decentralized communities and be on our own.
What I'm saying is we need to take advantage of opportunities that present themselves in order to move the ecosystem forward.
Sure, I agree with that.
And El Salvador has presented a window of opportunity for that. In the United States, that window of opportunity doesn't exist. Bitcoin is being securitized, right? And it's being primarily promoted as a store of value.
And taxed as one.
And as a line item. So it will never, I don't want to say never, but it won't be a place where Bitcoin reaches its full potential first. Like, and I'm talking about as a currency, as a store of value, as a medium of exchange, as a unit of count. I don't think that happens in the United States. I think that's happening somewhere else in the world. And,
it's called El Salvador.
And the way I see it is, it's at least for right now, El Salvador is the top contender.
Yep.
And so, yeah, it just depends. It depends on like where you want to take the fight. And who knows? Maybe like Bitcoin being used as a store of value is enough, right? Of a Trojan horse that rules get changed and laws get passed, and the United States then, becomes this bastion of economic freedom with Bitcoin being the base layer of that. But I don't know, in my opinion, that's going to take decades.
It's not happening anytime soon.
Yeah.
And so that's the fourth stage of the mentality shift, is then you make real big dramatic decisions like, I'm going to uproot my life and move to El Salvador because this is how strongly I feel about this war. This is my position now. This is how I hold my ground. You're not really fighting so much anymore in that metaphorical sense. You're just living it. This is just your life now. Living morally sound.
Yep.
With sound money. And you don't have to feel guilty about all the transactions you're making or whatever it is.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's still not that simple. I think there's a lot of it is a great framework. And it is like a process that a lot of people go through. But, it is not as black and white when you're going through it, but it is good context.
No, it's not black and white either. And it might happen in different order for people as well in a lot of ways. But I feel like from inception, from where you first learn about it to where it heads, us moving to El Salvador is kind of like the prime example. This is what happens at the end of that journey. You bring yourself to where you need to be around other freedom-minded individuals that believe in
Bitcoin Nirvana, baby. When you align all your lives, you literally, this is what it is.
I mean, it's a small country. It's hot. I mean, it's a beautiful country. There's plenty of reasons to come here.
I mean, another country can adopt Bitcoin, and then I think that's fantastic, right? Like, if another country adopts Bitcoin, it takes the pressure off of El Salvador, right? And it now decentralizes the network even more so. And now circular economies can be sprouting up all over the world. So the more countries that do adopt Bitcoin, the better. Again, I just don't, imagine that we build all the tools and, all the innovation happens here necessary for that to happen somewhere very easily. So I see this as the window of opportunity in order to build the tools go through the learning process, go through, just what's required in order to make a circular economy emerge, and then take that as a prototype, take the lessons we learned, and then that nodes just start popping up all over the world.
Yeah. And if you're feeling the heat and you're ready to come check out El Salvador, Bitcoin month is November. And it's starting off, there's a lot of things going on. But number one is the Adopting Bitcoin Conference, November 15th and 16th. It is where all the innovators and builders and developers and CEOs of Bitcoin companies, all the people doing stuff in Bitcoin, to the tune of this whole conversation of people actually putting their money where their mouth is to build out this new standard, they're showing up to this conference. And you can meet them and shake hands with them with a privileged access pass, which you can get at adoptingbitcoin.org. Use the discount code SOTH Studios for 10% off. Honestly, if anything we're saying in this episode resonates with you about El Salvador, this is a great opportunity to come check it out. Discount code SOTH Studios at Adopting Bitcoin. If you want to come and see even more of El Salvador, on November 10th through the 14th, Sovereignty Studios, hosted by Michael and I, are hosting the second Build an El Salvador retreat, where you can come see the country, learn about the country with some workshops we're putting on. We got plenty of special guests to come talk about what's going on here. We got excursions to the Bitcoin Beach, the legendary first Bitcoin micro circular economy going on in the world, I believe. We got an excursion to downtown San Salvador where you can see the transformations happening. And then we're going to do an excursion to Bitcoin Mountain, which is a new little circular economy project that doesn't even have the economy there yet. It's from Murph's Life Foundation. They're building a whole little eco-village community up there with Bitcoin as a centerpiece of its philosophical underpinnings. And we're going to go check that out as well. So that's November 10th through the 14th. It's a great experience, a great opportunity to come check out El Salvador, to come see Bitcoin country in all its glory and splendor. So we invite you, check it out at buildingelsalvador.com. Book a call with us. We'll see if it's a good fit, and we hope